up in a small town in Ohio. And as a little girl, my parents always had a large garden in the backyard. I don't remember enjoying gardening very much. I remember being forced to army crawl under a forest of tomato bushes because inevitably my mother would plant them too close together for any normal-sized human being to reach them. Little me was handed a plastic bag and told to crawl through the maze of leaves and vines, stretching across dirt and bugs to reach those shiny red globes. I still can't stand to eat raw tomatoes. The beans we had a magic out of the fairy tales, though. Mom always planted them to grow up the TV antenna. It was the old kind, a triangle ladder made out of metal that reached just above our 2-story garage. In some years, the beans would grow over 1.5 stories tall, and I would climb the ladder and pick them. We were preservers, canners, freezers. Summer was hot and sticky. It made only intensely worse by my mother's kitchen, which spent most of August at 100+ degrees as we cooked down pounds of tomatoes into jar after jar of tomato sauce. We would pick apples from the tree in the backyard and create like a year's worth of applesauce. And she rarely sweetened it, but copious amounts of cinnamon fell into the pot until it was the color of apple butter. It was dark and slightly sweet. I still find disappointment in eating store-bought applesauce. During bean season, we would boil the green beans for exactly 1 minute, then immediately dunk them in an ice water bath to stop the cooking process. And drained and dried, the beans were sealed in bags for our own frozen green beans throughout the winter. My dad would answer the phone during the height of the season. "Hello, Bean Factory, how can we help you?" I explained my childhood by stating, I had 1950s parents, as my parents were from a different generation than most of my classmates. Every once in a while, we would have a box of mac and cheese, for the most part dinners, which were 6 nights a week, consisted of homemade food. My mom always shook her head at my poor undernourished friends as they were fed cans of store-bought spaghetti sauce and Happy Meals and pizza. She had a rule: 1 hour's notice for any dinner guest, but other than that, there was no limit. My friends would come over and start going through the fridge or even telling me they would come over. My best friend Libby is still actually known as the fridge waiter, who at least had the courtesy to say, "Is there anything you don't want me to eat?" My parents, when they scratch their heads and wonder how they produced a neo-hippie liberal daughter, I always laugh. I can see the mechanisms. My neighborhood when I was younger was a rough one. There were a lot of drug dealers and gangs. We lived near the downtown area. It was a small town, but with a slow economy for decades. Our street was filled with Victorian houses and mansions in various states of decay and restoration. And over time, the drug dealers were forced to leave. My neighbors would come together every month to, plan and meet and talk about how to restore the neighborhood. Money was raised through home and garden tours. And once the gentrification process was complete, is when families started to move in. John and Jerry had their New Year's recoveries next door after Biff and Buffy's, can you believe those names, had their New Year's Eve bashes. Christmas was often a progressive dinner, and then Walt and Julie, our other neighbors, would cook for the masses. Walt had an actual cauldron in his backyard for when he would make his famous soups and stews. He would for homemade chicken noodles, he would start with 144 eggs and a ridiculously large amount of whole chickens. Every once in a while, he would call us up, "My house, dinner's on, 6 p.m. As I've gotten older, I've begun to recognize the space between myself and the way my parents live and the life of the church that they belong to. My food behaviors when I was younger were largely influenced by the rituals of the Catholic Church. We didn't eat meat on Fridays in Lent, and those Fridays were always a big community event. Fish fries. Fried, the only way Catholics knew how. We celebrated greeted with an incredible amount of fried fish, french fries, and massive quantities of dessert donated by the women of the Catholic Church. My providers of faith had no problem replacing the meat with other forms of grease. I call these reflective rituals on a homemade dessert. Homemade menu. Yeah. Yes. For me, this evolution into a garden-growing, community-based activist was inevitable. After studying theater in my undergrad at a school that was known for teaching social justice, I, of course, was off to grad school in Arizona to study the performance of protest. It was when I went to the desert, though, that I returned to gardening. I had comprehensive exams coming up, and my stress level was through the roof. And I was at a store one day, saw some planting things for sale, and thought, gardening, planting something would be nice. So I put a few pots of flowers and a tomato bush on my balcony, and I got to know the plants over the next couple of months. And by the end of the year, I had managed to take over most of my neighbors' balconies. New residents often assumed I must be an 80-year-old woman. But the balcony gardens connected me with my neighbors. They really did, specifically immigrants. In a city and state where migrants are often in fear and separation from their neighbors. I made friends with a family from Mexico. Their youngest daughter was always coming by to talk about school, and every once in a while her mom would come over and ask to borrow just a few herbs, no matter how many times I told her, just take what you want. The landowner had been renovating his backyard and offered me a large plot to garden. I didn't intend on creating a community garden, but I was so overwhelmed by all the amount of work that this garden was taking. And so I called up some friends. And I said, hey, you want to garden on Sunday? And eventually the neighbors turned out the garden. My single parent friends would drop off their kids for a few hours of yoga or errand running. We would let them plant with us or harvest tomatoes. And sometimes we'd even give them a hose and let them build a mud pit, figuring, some adults pay hundreds of dollars to cover themselves in mud. It's on this large corner property, and the previous residents had seeded the entire place with daisies. So when the monsoons come through, the landscape turns into a meadow. I'm sitting writing this right now on a picnic bench under a Palo Verde tree, with the mustard seed and daisies up to my knees, seeing if I can catch a glimpse of Rocky the rock squirrel. Rocky's been terrorizing my pea plants. We've built our cities, our neighborhoods, our towns without public space. We go to work, we pull up, we get in our cars, we go to work, we isolate ourselves in a cubicle. We come back home, pull in the garage, and rarely have to converse with our communities. But when someone stops by for a few minutes when I'm planting corn or picking peas in the front yard, there is a way to connect through the action and the presence happening outside. And eyes open wide when I can point to the 76 head of garlic across from my front yard right now. I always smile. That's right, a 76 head of garlic. And for me, that's planting a seed. And once there is a garden, that's a gateway to fresh food or sharing. Because once you plant your first zucchini bush, you're soon going to have to meet your neighbors to give the abundance away. I've been known to leave bags of zucchini on my neighbors' doorsteps. Sometimes it's the only way. Folks ask me, how did you create a community garden? But I didn't. I just showed up to garden and a community grew.